Thanks for joining me today as we talk about what is an Army interrogator. My name is Nathan Siebach. I'm a professional speaker and nonverbal communications consultant. Today, I'm going to break down for you what an Army interrogator actually is and what they actually do. Stay tuned to the end, and I'll show you where you can find the complete, unclassified training manual for human intelligence collectors, also known as interrogators. And by the end of this video, you'll understand much better what an Army interrogator actually does, and maybe more importantly, what they don't do. I served for 14 years in the U.S. Army as an analyst, an Arabic linguist, and an interrogator. And I happen to love the intelligence community. I've worked with a lot of different groups and spent deployments twice in an intelligence capacity. And so I'm happy to talk to you now about what an interrogator actually is and does, especially if you're considering joining the Army and you would like to become an interrogator, or you know somebody who is and you just want to learn more about it. So what is an Army interrogator? Well, every job in the Army has a specific code designating that job. And an interrogator is actually called a human intelligence collector, or HUMINT collector. And their code is 35M, or known as 35 Mike. And that's their job title, their military occupational specialty. A HUMINT collector is a person who is specifically trained and certified for, tasked with, and engages in the collection of information from individuals for the purpose of answering intelligence information requirements. That's a pretty concise statement, but there's a whole lot packed in there. You've got to be trained, you've got to be certified, you've got to be tasked to do it, and then you've got to actually go and collect from your authorized sources for the purpose of answering these very specific questions. And if you don't have all those in lines, you're breaking some rules and some policies and some laws up and down the chain somewhere. There are so many rules and laws that govern interrogators, and as we discuss this further, you'll see why that is. And these specially trained and certified individuals, they are the only personnel authorized to conduct human intelligence collection operations. So even though there's some other jobs in the Army that can get information, it is not specifically called human intelligence, or they're not intelligence collectors. And so we see this a lot because if you're out on a mission, if you're an infantry soldier and you're patrolling, maybe somebody comes up to you and they start talking to you and they give you information. You're totally allowed to ask questions and elicit whatever kind of information you want from them. But you've got to be careful that it doesn't break into the realm of interrogation. And they do something which is called tactical questioning. And it's asking very specific questions like, who are the bad guys, where are they at, how can we find them, that kind of stuff. That's totally good. We get that information, push it up to the analysts who have kind of like a bird's eye view. They get information from all sorts of different reports and sources, including interrogators. And they put it together and push it out. And that actual end result becomes an intelligence product. Up until that point, it's just information. Information in the right hands translates into intelligence once you put all the pieces together. Human intelligence is concerned with what people see, what they do, and what they hear. There's a lot of different types of intelligence gathering sources or intelligence professionals, and some use satellites. We've got linguists, you've got counterintelligence agents, and all these different sources put together a really good picture. Now, as I mentioned, interrogators are bound by their own set of laws. And did you know that the Army has its own legal system? It's called the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And there's actually still some funny, really goofy laws on the books, like from ages past, including laws that prohibit dueling, drinking alcohol with prisoners, committing adultery, and even using indecent language, which is really funny because if you've ever been in the military or spent any time with someone who has, you'll know that is pretty common around soldiers. So not only are interrogators bound by the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the military's legal system, they've also got the Geneva Convention, which is a worldwide deal, as well as the Detainment Treatment Act of 2005. And you may remember the kind of stories that came out in the early parts of the Iraq War, and that is what brought this on. So why am I telling you this? Well, first, it's important for you to understand that interrogators have a very specific job and they have very specific rules outlining and giving them guidance on how they can conduct interrogations, what they are to look for when they conduct interrogations, and how they are to treat those who are being interrogated. So, cool fact, did you know that many of our current interrogation techniques were actually shaped by a former Nazi. That's right. Hans Scharff was one of the greatest interrogators of World War II, and he worked for the Nazis. And what was unique about him, and what was so good about him, is that he never used physical means in order to elicit information from those he was questioning. So he used very common tactics which we use today, and that is setting ourselves up as a friend to the detainee or the person that can actually get the detainee what they want. So what we do as interrogators is we set ourselves up as the only person in the detainee's entire world that can get them what they want. So they've got to come through us. And so that allows us to set the rules for what they get. So sometimes they want to smoke. Sometimes they want different types of food or treats that are common to them. And we can give them these extra little perks if they'll give us information. And we can also put in a good word for their early release, all that kind of stuff. So by hanging these little carrots in front of them, it makes them want to talk to you and give you information. And this is what Hans Scharff did. He later came to the U.S. and lived here and then began teaching and training. He spoke to Congress and spoke to all sorts of people and began teaching these interrogation techniques. In 1948, Hans Scharff was invited to the U.S. to testify at the trial of Martin James Monti, and he was the first ever U.S. military officer to be convicted of treason. This guy's got a cool story. I'm going to make a video on him at some point because Lieutenant Monti, he was a member of the Air Force. He stole a plane while he was in Europe, flew into Germany, defected, and began recording propaganda and put it out all over the radio as a member of the Waffen SS unit. He even made it up to the rank of a lieutenant in that unit. And he pled guilty of crimes and was sentenced to 25 years in a military prison, which is at Fort Leavenworth, and that is not a fun place to be. Let's get back on track. What does an interrogator do? Now, the actual manual and the roles and responsibilities, all this, they outline 6 different areas. They conduct source operations, and that's where you're working with an individual and they're going out and getting information and coming back to you and giving you information. They liaise with host nation officials and allied counterparts. This is a really, really big, important piece that I did on my second deployment while I was overseas, that we would work with different host nations, so the country that we're in, as well as other nations that are also operating within that area. Because while you're deployed, you're working with a whole bunch of different nations, not just the country that you're in, but you may also be working with the French, the Germans, the British, Australians, New Zealanders, Lithuanians, all the Anians were there. There were so many people. And so you're working there to deconflict, make sure that you're not running in the same sources, and also that any good information you have that you can pass on gets passed around. The next thing is eliciting information from select sources. So this is where you can get into some really cool stuff. If you've got somebody that you recruit to work for you. Now that requires additional training and additional certification. So there's actually a smaller percentage of interrogators that are authorized to run sources. But if you can do that, then you task them to go collect certain information based on their placement, their access, their motivation, all this stuff is going to allow you to put together some requirements for them to go collect on. Next, you debrief U.S. and allied forces, as well as civilian personnel, including refugees, displaced persons, and third country nationals and the local inhabitants. And this is important. This happens a lot, the debriefing. So if a U.S. general goes to meet with let's say an Iraqi officer, afterwards, the general will meet with one of our interrogators, and that interrogator will ask him all sorts of questions that's going to give us information based on the Iraqi military and anything that they may have discussed or covered just kind of off the cuff, and help us answer some of our questions. And what's really interesting is that there's a lot of things that may happen just in basic conversation that a normal person might not think as very important, but as an interrogator and knowing what our intelligence gaps are, what our holes are, that may be able to fill in some information that we can pass up to the analysts. Fifth thing that they do, very common, discussed about and talked about, it's the interrogation of enemy prisoners of war as well as other detainees. And this typically happens in a detention facility. You've got a whole bunch of detainees under your command, and a lot of this is directed by the analysts from above. They'll see that you've got a detainee who, let's say, used to be a bomb maker. And so the analysts will send down questions for you as the interrogator, say, who did he work for? Where did he get his supplies? How was he recruited? How did he transfer the materials, the bomb, from himself to the actual person that placed the bomb? All sorts of stuff like that. So the analysts are always trying to fill in the holes, and the interrogators are the ones that are going to be asking the questions, trying to elicit that information. The last thing is the exploitation of documents, media, and material. And that's kind of cool. It's called DocX, or document exploitation. And back during the First World War was when they actually started putting units together to do this kind of thing. And they would go and they would take any kind of enemy weapons, and they would start to take them apart and figure out how they worked. And that's how we were able to improve a lot of our technology over the time, is by capturing equipment, documents, other things like that, figure out what the enemy was doing, how they were working, and hopefully we can make better weapon systems as a result of that. So that's a whole lot about what their roles are. And it's important to note, too, there are 5 phases of collection. And this is planning, approach, questioning, termination, and reporting. And honestly, that reporting takes like so much time. You are always writing reports. You're always sending stuff up. So some other activities that we didn't talk about are tactical questioning, which is kind of like spur of the moment. You figure out this guy might have some information, and so you just ask him specific, like straight up questions. Tactical questioning is just expedient initial questioning for information that has some form of tactical value that we can put into place immediately. So you're not running an approach, which is like trying to get them to give you all sorts of crazy information. You're just asking them straight up. Next thing is screening. This happens a lot, and our unit that was in Kuwait did this very frequently. So if people want to work for the U.S., whether they want to work as translators or interpreters, or they just want to be cooks on post or whatever, they get screened frequently by interrogators. As we talked about, they do interrogation. And to be clear, interrogation is the systemic effort to procure information to answer specific collection requirements. So that's what we talked about before. And they do this through either direct or indirect questioning techniques. So why am I telling you this? Well, there's a lot of stuff that an interrogator can do, but what they actually do is going to be based on their specific mission set, whatever they're tasked to do. And so some of the units we've sent a whole group of interrogators overseas, say 40 of them, and they all get sent to different areas in groups of 2, 3, or 4, or 5, whatever. And in this group, they're running sources. And in this group, they are at a detention facility, and every day they're conducting interrogations with the detainees. At another one, they're doing a whole lot of screening. It's just based on whatever. All right, question for you. Who is your favorite interrogator, or what is your favorite interrogation scene from the movies or TV? Let me know in the comments below. And to be completely honest, most of that stuff is like Hollywood stuff. It's not legit, but it can be like super entertaining to watch. All right, last of all, what makes a good interrogator? So my first training in nonverbal communication actually came during one of the courses that I attended for interrogation. And this became a passion of mine and is relevant for nearly every professional field, not just the military, not just interrogators, but no matter what field you work in, you're using nonverbal communication every day, all the time. So the Army says that the following traits are required for a successful interrogator: alertness, patience and tact, credibility, objectivity and self-control, adaptability, perseverance, appearance and demeanor, and lastly, initiative. A lot of that goes with like so many different jobs in the military. It's funny when you read the manuals, they'll always put like what's required, but it's always the same stuff. So the actual areas of knowledge, and this is really important. As an interrogator, you're going to get trained in some of this stuff. And after your training, it's important that you keep on top of it, because when you go out into the real world and you're conducting those interrogations, you got to know your stuff, left, right, center, all of it. So you've got to know the area of operation. And that is specifically what area your unit, your mission is in control of. So when I was in Baghdad, Iraq, we were a theater unit. And so I was part of the intelligence section that covered the entire country. And so when I would put out my intelligence reports every day, it would cover the entirety of the area. Now, sometimes it's going to be way less than that. It could get broken down into a province or into a city, but wherever you're at, that's going to be your area of operation. You got to know what's going on there. You've got to know the current potential threat forces. And when you get into like the whole terrorism aspect, there are so many different terrorist groups and different cells operating within these sections. It's wild. You got to know all the applicable laws, the policies, all that. There's tons of it, and they're always coming out with new stuff. So it's important that you like stay read up on it, especially with whatever task you're conducting at the time, because there's going to be things that you can do, you can't do, things that you can say, things that you can't say. You can never like threaten violence to the detainee. You can't put them in stress positions. You can't make their life absolutely miserable. But there are some things that you can do, like you can withhold some things from them to help get them to talk. And so by law, we've got to give them 4 hours of sleep each day or each night. You've got to give them food and water. But with that, you don't have to give them all the extra stuff on top of it. So you can get really creative with how you encourage them to give you information. You've also got to know the collection requirements. So whoever you're working for, they're going to give you information that's going to be like super important for you to collect on, because that information goes up to people who can actually action it. They can actually go kick down doors and pull in bad guys. So they're going to want to know specific information from your detainees, and you got to know what information that is so you can get it to them as fast as possible. You've got to know the cultural awareness. I think that speaks for itself. You've got to know proficiency in the target language. There was a time early on in the Iraq-Afghan war, all that stuff, where we were getting deployed so much that there was this huge shortage of interrogators. There was a huge shortage of analysts. And so they were just pushing everybody through the schoolhouse as fast as possible because we were all getting deployed. And they actually waived the requirement for a target language for interrogators for a bit. But it is back now as we speak. So if you're an interrogator, you got to go to language school, which is at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. It's gorgeous there. It's the military's premier school for language, and it's absolutely awesome. I went there for Arabic. And next, you've got to know these last two are super important, and this is, again, what got me into nonverbal communication. It's understanding basic human behavior. And from the manual, it actually says, a HUMINT collector can best adapt himself to the source's personality and control of the source's reactions when he understands basic behavioral factors, traits, attitudes, drives, motivations, and inhibitions. All nonverbal stuff. And the last one is neurolinguistics. And it says neurolinguistics is a behavioral communication model and a set of procedures that improve communication skills. The HUMINT collector should read and react to nonverbal communications. He must be aware of the specific neurolinguistic clues of the cultural framework in which he is operating. Neurolinguistics can be a little bit challenging, especially if you're working in a language that's not your primary language, but your interpreters there are going to be super helpful in letting you know what's going down and how the person feels about you and how they feel about the information they're actually hearing from the detainee. So why am I telling you all this? That's because there are soldiers out there who would love to be an interrogator, and then they get into the schoolhouse and they realize it's not for them. When I went through, we had 62 initially start the course, and we had less than half of that actually graduate. And some of those voluntarily walked away because it can be really demanding, really challenging, and you may find that you've got a conflict of interest, or you're just not really enjoying going back and forth and yelling at or getting yelled at by detainees or instructors and whomever. But I will say being an interrogator was super rewarding. It was fun, and it gave me a new set of skills about how to talk to others and how to adapt with them. And in future videos, I'll talk about some of the training that we did and some things that you can do to help improve your communication and also help your skills with the listening information from people that you want to talk to. Thank you for sticking with me to the end of the video. Please, if you learned anything awesome, go ahead and punch that like button an odd number of times. And if you subscribe too, it helps me as a creator give you more content like this. Now, if you want to know all about the Army Interrogator operations, you can find the unclassified manual by searching for FM 2-22.3. It's titled Human Intelligence Collector Operations. And I've put the link in the description for you. Thank you so much. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook. And remember, it's not what you say, it's how you say it.